So I feel a little bad after that peaceful moment to ask the question I am about to ask, which is, think for a moment about any kind of circumstance, situation, experience, relationship, where you remember thinking to yourself, I might as well give up. Things have always been this way. I've tried a million things, and they'll continue to be this way, so I'm just done. How many of you have ever had that experience? If I'm the only one, I'm going to be super embarrassed. Does anyone want to share an example? I'm guessing not, which is okay. But, it can also be big global things. Some people might say the Israeli-Palestinian conflict might be something that they lose hope about sometimes, or different things in our country, different relationships for sure. So I ask this question because in this week's Torah portion, Parshat Chukat, we find God, Moses, and the Israelites at a standstill, both wondering, will things ever change? Will God actually lead the Israelites into the promised land? You can imagine after 40 years, you might start to wonder, is that going to happen? God and Moses wonder, will the Israelites ever stop complaining? Will they? We don't know. Time will tell. We don't do it anymore though, right, guys? So how did they get to this moment, this standstill? So part of what's happening in this Torah portion, just a quick summary. So Miriam dies, and she has been the source of water throughout the wilderness. And there's this incident where the Israelites cry out, they need water, they tell Moses. God tells Moses to speak to a rock to get water, which makes sense, because that's how we get water today. But what happens is Moses decides to strike the rock with his rod, and he says, here's the water you want, you rebels, you crazy complaining group of people that I did not ask for. And this is the moment that Moses gets told by God that he is not going to enter the promised land. He is not going to be able to set his feet on the ground of this place that he has spent 40 years of his life, if not more, trying to get to. So, obviously, he was frustrated with all the complaining. But at this moment, a little bit after that, they continue traveling. And again, they find themselves without water. They find themselves, it's a little confusing. They find themselves without food. They say, we have no bread. But then they say, and this bread is terrible. And what they mean is that there's manna, which they don't have to work for at all. In our prayer about that we say before we eat bread, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, we thank God for bringing forth bread from the earth. They actually meant it, they got bread from the earth. We get wheat and have to go from there. So they're complaining yet again. I would argue not completely unfairly, although I understand why God's upset. So what does God do? What any of you might do. God sends a lot of serpents and snakes to terrorize the people. And the people very quickly, you'll be surprised, realize the error of their ways with all of these snakes coming to bite them. And they quickly beg Moses to intervene on their behalves with God. And God listens to Moses. God instructs Moses to create a snake statue, a copper serpent, that should be mounted way up high. And God explains that if someone who has been bitten by a snake looks at the statue, they will be healed. And those who do not look up will not be healed. What is unusual about this is that the process generally works as follows. Israelites complain or mess up. God gets angry that they're complaining or messing up. The Israelites beg for forgiveness. God eventually forgives, usually with the intervention of Moses, and after some significant damage has been done. But what is interesting this time about the cycle we see in this Torah portion is that the Israelites are required to actually do something in order to escape the punishment. They are required to look up at this statue that God asked Moses to make. Rabbi Ronit Sadok encourages us to take a look at who these Israelites are as we try to understand why it's different this time around. What makes God require something of the Israelites to overturn their punishment? She reminds us this incident is near the end of the Israelites' 40 years of wandering. Their 40 years of wandering in the desert. This is not the generation that were slaves in Egypt. These are all of their children. It's the next generation. And God is kind of having what I would call a massive deja vu with the children of the slaves, hearing them complain about the exact same things that their parents complained about. And you may remember that their parents ended up being told that they would not be able to enter the land when the 12 scouts went to go scout out the land. They were like right there after not so long. And 10 of them came back and said, it's really great. There's no way we can do this. There are giants there. They have amazing fortresses. There's no possible way we can overcome this. And the people listened. And God said, you know what? You're still too much stuck in the slave mentality. You're not going to be able to enter the land. It's going to be your children. So now that their children are still complaining about water and food, the same things their parents complained about when they were taken out of Egypt, God wonders, are these the people that can actually do it? So Rabbi Tzadok argues that God is now trying to figure out whether or not this generation, whose complaints, again, sound a lot like their parents, whether this generation is actually different, whether they, if confronted with challenges and bumps in the roads like their parents, every single time will throw their hands up and claim there's no hope and it just can't be done, and just be totally fatalistic. Or maybe this people have the ability to deal with struggle, with resilience and with strength, whether they will be able to enter the land, which will not be easy. They have to be prepared for the situation in which they will have to struggle in the promised land. So God tells Moses to make the serpent, but you have to look up at it. This whole scene with the snakes and a serpent statue is quite unusual, and I feel very strongly that to be able to say part of the Torah is unusual is a pretty rare thing, because there are so many things that are so unusual, but this is also unusual in our Torah that we have this scene. But our ancient sages ask about the serpent that Moses made. Can a snake deal death or give life? Rabbi Tzadok rephrases the ancient rabbi's questions and responds to it. Is this really a snake that's doing this? Is this really a snake that is healing people or not healing people? She says, no, it's not. It's the people's ability to look up. They're given a choice in this moment. Do they want to sit in despair? Do they want to give up? Because again, they need more water. Because again, they're stuck in the desert. Do they want to keep looking down with that mentality? Or, God wants to know, are they able to look up? So how do we apply this lesson to the scenarios that might have come to our minds a few minutes ago? When I asked, what are those moments that you have succumbed to, those moments that you have said, these are impossible, things are never going to change? While we might want to stop, we might want to admit defeat in the face of what feels insurmountable. What this narrative teaches us, Rabbi Tzadok argues, is that even something as simple as lifting up our heads and looking up to what is in front of us and above us, toward the great expanse, even something that small can actually reroute our path. It can actually change the way that we see ourselves, the way we see possibility, and it might even change something in our lives that we thought was absolutely unchangeable. And this is why that is the generation that was able to enter the land of Israel. Shabbat Shalom.